copy of a copy of a copy of a copy copy. Deja vu.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Deja Reviewed podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows that were later rebooted. For season 1, we're discussing The Twilight Zone. I'm Michael.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 29, titled Nightmare as a Child. And Nightmare as a Child originally aired on April 29th, 1960. It was directed by Alvin Ganzer. It was written by Rod Serling, starring Rod Serling, Janice Rule, and Shepard Strudwick.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance of things and suddenly up ahead. Just cross over. You're moving into a land, another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Here's Rod Serling's opening voiceover from Nightmare as a Child. Month of November, hot chocolate, and a small cameo of a child's face, imperfect only in its solemnity. And these are the improbable ingredients to a human emotion, an emotion, say, like fear. But in a moment, this woman, Helen Foley, will realize fear. She will understand what are the properties of terror. A little girl will lead her by the hand and walk with her into a nightmare.
And I don't think our description from IMDb is going to help explain what's happening in this episode much more, but it says, a school teacher keeps seeing a strange little girl in her apartment building, which kind of misses a big point of it. So why don't I read this synopsis written by Gary KMCD on IMDb.
Oh, not Gary.
Gary, I think he's written probably one for all of these. Helen Foley's a school teacher who, when arriving home one day, meets a little girl, Marky, sitting on the steps just outside her apartment door. Helen invites her in and gives her a cup of hot cocoa. Strangely, however, Marky seems to know a great deal about her, that she doesn't like marshmallows in her cocoa or that she has a scar on her elbow. She also knows what Helen did earlier in the day, including seeing a somewhat familiar man, Peter Selden, behind the wheel of a car. When Selden arrives at her apartment a few moments later, he says he worked for her mother, but Helen has no memory of what happened to her mother all those years ago. As her memories return, however, she finds herself in grave danger. And then we'll just spoil the ending right now. Selden is the man who killed her mother. She had blocked out this horrible memory of herself as a child, witnessing her mother being killed. She couldn't see Selden's face. Marky is her as a child, so she kind of is warning her and trying to get her to recoup her memory. Fair?
Yeah, I was also going to say it was good. It was good that Selden turned out to be the murderer, because that dude is so creepy the entire time he's there that I like wrote in my notes, halfway through the episode, I'm like, if he doesn't turn out to have like killed or raped her or something, they have completely mishandled this episode.
I would also like to point out, very creepy and very excellent, Terry Burnham played Marky, the little girl, and she should really get a above the line credit over Shepard Strudwick, because she did an excellent job, I thought, as this young child actress. And I looked her up to be like, did she turn into someone that we knew? Not Terry. I didn't know her name was Terry Burnham yet, but I was waiting for Marky to be this famous actress now that had a bunch of roles and we knew. And she really kind of didn't. She didn't have that much of an acting career, considering how good I thought she was playing this super creepy Marky.
Yeah, and I also thought it was, when you were reading the cast list, it's interesting that in the above the line top billed cast, that she wasn't included, because I thought she may have been the best actor in this, and certainly had a major role. But I think there's a long tradition of sort of child actors not getting, not basically having the clout in terms of just where their names get credited and stuff. Even if you watch movies where the kids are sometimes the main actors, and you'll see all the adults in it sort of credited first, and then after, when they get down to the list where they're scrolling all the cast, that's when you find out who the actual lead actors were with the kids. So not uncommon, but I agreed with you. I thought she should have gotten higher billing.
Unless you're Shirley Temple.
Right. Well, but she already was the star, know, and that's kind of common. Like, look, if you have a movie that has and I'm saying this as somebody who's worked in indie film, if you have somebody who's a big name and a star, you get their name up there, even if they're not a major character, because that's good marketing. But some of the ones where maybe none, like in this episode, none of these people were, to the best of my knowledge, particularly stars. And I would certainly say the kid had as much a role as Selden did. It's not surprising that as the adult, he's the one who kind of gets credited as one of the leads and she's a secondary because she's a kid.
And I think that still kind of carries through. Although they probably had similar amounts of screen time, I would say the star of Sixth Sense was probably Haley Joel Osment, right? And Bruce Willis, I'm sure, was the draw, though, that got everyone to come in. Well, maybe not.
And I mean, they're sort of co-leads. I mean, well, definitely nobody knew who Haley Joel Osment was before that. So if I'm the producers and like, okay, who's the actor's name on the marquee? It's Bruce Willis. He was a big star.
Yeah, true.
So that's a marketing thing.
Alvin Ganzer, the director, we've seen him a couple times before. He directed What You Need, which we definitely didn't like. He directed The Hitchhiker, which we were kind of middling on. Then he directed this one, and he will have also directed one more I assume it's still this season because it's 1960, The Mighty Casey, which I heard is not a great episode.
I'm just thinking of Casey at the Bat, and I'm wondering if it's related to that.
I'm positive it's a baseball episode. So, I shouldn't have spoiled that. Just now will have an advantage at your guess.
Well, I mean, just from hearing the title, that was going to be my guess. So not a spoiler. Yeah, it's interesting when we think about the directors and kind of how we rate them, and you go back through those episodes, and you're right, none of those were particular favorites of ours, but I'm trying to think back and like remember if there were good or bad things about the direction, or if it was more like those were not stories we particularly liked, There were a couple weird things in The Hitchhiker. Remember, he had like that weird, like zoom in on the hitchhiker's face, like trying to hitch when she drives away, or like smiling directly at the camera. There were a couple strange or the
choices.
Ones where it's like almost jump scare where he like steps at like right in his frame. And yeah, okay. So those were weird directorial choices. Fair.
I also remember there was you pointed out that there was a very weird sound effect when a train, that's not the Doppler effect, when the train comes by and just misses her car. Those are the things I remember about the direction of The Hitchhiker.
Well, and what I don't remember from either What You Need or The Hitchhiker, but I definitely noticed here was some very weird choices on camera angles and where to cut that were really distracting.
One thing I do remember.
I'm already not a big fan of Alvin, I guess.
One thing I do remember about What You Need is the insanely sped up guy getting hit by a car toward the end of it when the guy crosses the street in the tight shoes. That's the only thing I can really remember about the direction there.
Well, and this is the story, but then the scene after with like the couple comes out and like gets the comb.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, let's take the picture for the paper of people who happen to live near the area where this crime occurred.
Right.
In terms of the stunts, I thought the ending stunt of this was Selden, or a stunt double who didn't really look like Selden, but was supposed to be him, falling down the stairs. That was a pretty good stunt fall. I mean, he kind of like leaps over the banister and then really does a couple of somersaults down the stairs. I was impressed with that.
Well, let's jump right into that then, because if Serling had come out last episode and said he can't write strong female protagonists, and this episode had been the next episode, I think that would have been a much more impressive follow-up than Mirror Image, because this was I thought the main character, Helen Foley, was played by Janice Rule, was probably the strongest female character we've seen, maybe 16 millimeter Shrine. But the fact that she single-handedly defeated the villain in Peter Selden. So toward the end of it, when she realizes he's the murderer, there was a cool jump scare where she thinks Marquis is behind her. And I keep wanting to say Marquis because it's spelled like Bismarcky. She thinks it's Marquis behind her. She turns and looks, and it's actually Peter Selden has gotten back into her apartment, and she struggles. She runs. She pushes past him, runs outside, is knocking on these other apartment doors, and finally shoves Peter Selden over the railing and kills him, like breaks his neck and kills him, which was the most, maybe one of the most proactive female protagonists we've seen. And I guess Walter Jameson was there was some stronger female, although they weren't leads in that way. She wasn't the lead.
Yeah, she was a very secondary character in that. I was going to say, I agree with you on her being a strong character, and actually really took some action at the end, and as you said, defeats the villain. I did think it was interesting that in the sort of coda scene with the the police are looking at the body, and then one of them comes up the stairs and talks to the psychologist. It very much reminded me of the end of Psycho, where everything's kind of resolved. And actually the shot where he was coming up the stairs first reminded me of the shot with Arbogast falling down the stairs from Psycho. And so I'm like, oh, this reminds me of Psycho. And then he comes up and the psychologist comes out. He's like, I gave her a sedative. And he basically like explains what we just saw.
Yes, I made that same comment.
It's very much the end of Psycho with where like the psychologist comes out and explains what we just saw.
It's funny you say that because one of my notes, and I swear we don't talk about these before, but one of my notes is this is the most Hitchcockian Twilight Zone episode I feel like we've seen. The whole feel to me was very Hitchcock, and I of course love Hitchcock. This was a creepy episode to me, but I cut you off. Finish your thought on that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. But just to finish off the bit, talking about the female protagonist, when the lieutenant and I got myself off track, when the lieutenant and the psychologist are talking, they're like, oh, she's very fortunate, or she would have been a homicide victim. I thought it's almost, I mean, they weren't talking with her, but it's almost like a microaggression sort of thing. Like it would have been very easy to say, yeah, but if it wasn't for her presence of mind or her fighting back or whatever, but like if she wasn't so fortunate, like they don't even give her credit for fighting him off. And I thought that was worth noting, given the issues that we've talked about in the past about how women are represented in the Twilight Zone and Serling's own sort of on camera discussion about that. And then I think also, in this time right now where at least I'm trying to be much more aware. And I think a lot of people are, of these things that might not be sort of explicit. Like they don't come out and like, well, she's a woman, so she couldn't have fought the guy, like they're not explicit about that, but the way they phrase it kind of takes away her agency. And I thought that was interesting in an episode where she was strong. And honestly, the kid was, I know the kid was a younger version of her, but was a second sort of strong female
for sure
in the episode.
I agree on that end thing too. That was really one of my only complaints about this episode, because it was another one of those instances of Twilight Zone, like you said, coming out and just having dialogue that explains what I feel like very clearly already got. And along those lines, I do think that this was, Kelsey and I actually watched this one together and she enjoyed it too. If you could, spoilers that I enjoyed it, but we early on guessed that Marky was a young version of Helen. But I do still think they did a pretty good job hiding it, if that makes sense. Even though I guessed early on, I think that it was still not so overtly put out there, maybe, and even though I knew that she sort of was, it was like, well, why is she the young version? Did she die as a kid? Are we in hell? Like there were still some questions that I had of what was actually happening with the thing. And I was super tuned into this episode the entire time.
Yeah, I'm glad that you noted that, because what you were saying about, that you sort of suspected it was her, but they kind of did a good job hiding it. I think this episode, I'll also say I like this one a lot. It's not my all-time favorite, which we'll get to when we do the ratings. I did have some issues with it, but I did enjoy it. But I think what you hit on is something that I don't know that the episode always did well, but I also feel like I don't know how it would have done better, because the structure of the story itself, they're almost like painted into a corner with this idea of there's things we suspect or know, but aren't 100% sure on. So at some point it has to kind of let us in on those. But as soon as it does, it feels like, well, yeah, obviously. And there were a couple instances that the one that really jumped out at me was it's right before the second commercial break. The first one's kind of like right after.
Yeah, the first one. I pointed that out to Kelsey. I'm like, wouldn't it be crazy if we were watching this and there was a commercial break right now, like 2 minutes into this episode, and she was laughing about that?
The last few episodes we've seen have had that really early commercial break. And I wonder, again, this is something that a better podcast would have done some research on, which I did not.
There's no such thing as a better podcast.
I wondered if there was some sort of standardization from the network or from Serling trying to get a more regimented structure to when they were doing the commercial breaks. Because we talked earlier on about how it kind of seemed like they were just throwing commercial breaks in wherever they wanted. And sometimes they'd be really early and sometimes late. And we've seen them get into more of a regular rhythm. And I wonder if that was something just coincidental of the last few episodes, or something that the network or the show actually was intentionally trying to be more consistent with. But
sorry, again, let me just point it again with no research. Do you think there's a possibility that this was a cold open, that this part before what we think is the first commercial break, because we're watching on Netflix. Do you think the actual intro to the Twilight Zone didn't happen until after a sort of cold open and like 3 minutes into the episode.
Like maybe they did that and then put the Twilight Zone music and
Right.
stuff and then come back. Maybe. I don't know. That's a good question.
Because they haven't done a pan down from the Starfield or anything that leads right into the episode in a while.
Actually, they have.
Have they?
They've had several of the recent ones, which we kind of got away from talking about because we kind of just decided that was sort of their thing, have had that sort of tilt down off the Starfield into something. And in fact, a couple of them I've noted where they're like trying to do it and it doesn't really make sense, but they're doing it anyway.
Okay, well then it probably isn't the case. Sorry, go ahead.
What is it? So it's the part where it's right before this break, Helen's mentioning to Selden, like, yeah, there's this little girl and calls herself Marky. And Selden goes, that was your nickname when you were a little girl. They called you Marky. Yeah. And it felt super on the nose and predictable as soon as he said it and felt like they were like holding our hand. But on the other hand, I had suspected that the girl was her, but wasn't 100% sure. So I think that they were kind of in this awkward place where they needed in some way for that to be confirmed. I think maybe they could have handled it a little more gently. Like when the girl first says Marky, I think maybe Helen could have been like, they used to call me Marky, like almost to herself, and then like move on or something. I don't know. I hear you on that. And I'm really not sure whether to blame the episode for it or not, because I don't know that there was a better solution, because they did a really good job of insinuating a lot of stuff that we sort of felt was going to happen, but that they had to kind of make explicit at some point to confirm because we weren't totally sold on it. And then if I can get back to the Hitchcock thing for a second, because I agree with you that this felt very Hitchcockian, and I'd have to think back of all the other episodes, but you might be right. This is certainly, one that felt that way more so than many of the others.
I'll interject right here just to say the only one that I even mentioned that I thought had a sort of Hitchcockian shot, which is very strange because it's this director, was The Hitchhiker. Remember when I mentioned to you in that episode that there was a shot of her interior of her car as she's watching the train go by, and just the way it's framed and the way the shot looked was very Hitchcockian to me. And I asked you if there was something that was triggering in my mind that you recognize from Hitchcock. I don't think we could come up with a specific in that, but there was, maybe this director has a Hitchcock feel to him.
I think I mentioned it reminded me of the, and it's not like a signature shot, like plenty of people have done that same shot, but it reminded me of the shots of Marion Crane in her car driving in Psycho. So another one with Psycho reference. The interesting thing is Psycho comes out the same in 1960s. So I would have to look at the exact times, but I have to think this was not like these people were consciously copying Psycho. Right. I'm wondering if this is something in the zeitgeist. And the thing about to wrap up on the psychologist explaining things at the end, I love Psycho. It's probably my second favorite Hitchcock movie. I really love Rear Window.
Rear Window is my favorite. Yeah.
Psycho is really good. And but that ending sequence with the psychologist coming out and explaining things has always felt super awkward and unnecessary, and the kind of misstep you don't think of Hitchcock making. And we have the same thing here. And this is one where I'm wondering, and again, I have not done the research to confirm this, I'm wondering if in the 1960s, kind of like the sort of idea of the mental disorder and projecting a second person or having multiple personalities, if that was kind of new in the zeitgeist, and, the Twilight Zone and Hitchcock, maybe at that time, both felt that wasn't, we've talked a lot about time travel and sci-fi and how we've seen all this stuff, but maybe in 1960 audiences weren't as used to it. We also haven't really interrogated that very much, so who knows? But the fact that both these in the same year kind of make what I would consider today the same misstep in terms of somebody needing to really explain what had happened and that the mind created this projection and blah, blah, blah. I wonder if just maybe in 1960 that was something that audiences weren't as familiar with, and they didn't think audiences would get without that explicit sort of expert coming in and telling you what happened, because it is weird that both of them have almost the same ending scene.
Frankly, in 2020, mental health, most people don't understand mental health and think weird things about mental health. So certainly in 1960,
which is true, but if you see something like Psycho, or even Joker, which just came out, which this is not like, I guess, a specific spoiler because it's vague enough, but there's
he fights Batman
parts
eventually.
in there where it turns out there's parts in that where it turns out he's projecting and imagining characters that don't exist. And nobody for either of those, and that's in 2019 and Fight Club back in the 90s. And this is, that's a common device in plenty of other movies, but nobody needs to come out. Fight Club doesn't end with a psychologist coming out and explaining like, so Edward Norton's character created it. Like we get it narratively.
Sure.
And I'm with you on people understanding mental health as it actually is being a problem. But I think this narrative device of somebody creating this imaginary character that we see on screen is common and we all get it. And I wonder if maybe the filmmakers and, TV maker in this case were concerned that audiences wouldn't get it at that time. And maybe there wasn't a lot of prior exposure to that.
That's a perfect teaser. Let's take a break now because I want to talk about some of the really cool, creepy moments of this episode. And I have Fight Club in my notes about one of them. So perfect segue, Mark. We'll be right back. Okay, we are back. And Mark, before the break, my face lit up when you mentioned Fight Club, because one of the things, and I actually don't know if this is from Fight Club, but one of the things that this reminded me of.
Good reference.
I was trying to Google this to see if I was remembering this correctly. Maybe you can help me along. I couldn't find it, Googling along. But at one point, Helen Foley is giving her dialogue and Marky is behind her and she's mouthing along the dialogue, Helen's dialogue. And there were two things that jumped in my mind. I was like, is this just the child actress in her mouthing along the dialogue because she's trying to remember what her next line is? Or is this an intentional choice? And I'm hoping it's an intentional choice. And I swear, and I could not find any evidence of this, but I was checking this movie details subreddit, trying to find, I swear there's one point in Fight Club when the narrator and Tyler Durden, one is mouthing the other's line, and not just the one. I know that there's plenty of examples of Tyler telling the narrator what to say, and then he's saying it right afterwards. But I know all the things where like Tyler Durden gets hit and the narrator flinches and all that kind of stuff. There's plenty of examples of that. But I swear at one point in Fight Club, unless I'm completely misremembering, there's a scene where the narrator is mouthing along with what Tyler's actually saying or vice versa. Am I wrong?
So I can't definitively say you're wrong. I would have to go look for that, but also I've seen Fight Club a lot and I don't remember any moment where that happens. The closest things I could think of would be the segment at the end where he's kind of realizing that he is Tyler, and we see flashbacks to some earlier things where they kind of intercut like Tyler saying the line with him saying the line, like, so it's like continuous, but I can't think of a moment where they're both on screen and one of them's mouthing the dialogue as the other one's saying it. Again, I cannot 100% say that never happened. I never watched the movie specifically looking for that, but I've seen it a lot and have never noticed that happening.
Well, I will tell you this, doing that much research about Fight Club just made me want to go watch Fight Club. I just didn't have time to watch it before we were recording this episode, but the spirit was the same. I mean, there's so many drop-ins in Fight Club that it, by the way, is a fantastic movie and still holds up extremely well. And of course, you're going to put Brad Pitt and Edward Norton and Helena Bonham Carter in a movie, and Meatloaf. You're starting off on a very solid foot. Yeah. But there was a ton of, I'm definitely going to be watching Fight Club sometime in the near future after doing all that research on it.
We watched it recently with my commons. Actually, after the pandemic started, everyone had gone home. We were still, sort of doing some online events. We did a virtual movie night with Fight Club because we had done in January a screening of Joker where we like rented out a theater and saw it, and we were talking about it after. And, some of the obvious references for someone, our generation or older in Joker were obviously Taxi Driver and King of Comedy from Scorsese, but then also Fight Club in terms of the sort of
anti-establishment,
psychotic, seeing a person who's not there that they like have this relationship with, but ends up kind of leading this movement accidentally almost. Anyway, what was interesting is so in the discussion afterwards, we were talking about those, and a lot of the students who, let's figure if they were living in the Commons are mostly 18 to 20. had not seen any of those movies. And Taxi Driver, I kind of get.
I've only seen Taxi Driver once. It's great, but
I still think they should see it, and it's great, and it's a classic film. But it's also like, okay, that was 50 years ago at this point. But I guess Fight Club I still thought of as more recent. But then I'm like, well, it was 20 years ago. They weren't born yet when it came out, and certainly weren't. Watching it when it's new, it would have been something they have to catch later. So, but then several of them were really interested in seeing that, so we did that as one of our screenings. But it was one of those to me where you become aware of how quickly some of these references age, and that, something that I still think of that as a part of contemporary cinema, but that's over 20 years old at this point. It's certainly not current anymore.
So back to this idea of her mouthing along, one of the only beefs that I had other than that final ending scene with the doctor was it didn't really make sense for Marky to know a lot. It would have made more sense for Helen to know things about Marky than for Marky to know things about Helen. Because Marky is kind of, I don't know what we thought Marky was. Was she a frozen image of her as a child? Was she sort of her guardian angel at this point? Because she does warn her about Peter Selden coming into the apartment. It wouldn't make sense if she was a child frozen in time before this horrible thing happened, or just after this horrible thing happened, for her to be knowing that Helen saw this thing, saw Peter in the car, that all this stuff. She obviously would have known about the burn, and she would have known about the murder, I guess, and the thing that she didn't like marshmallows in her hot cocoa and things like that. But what did you think Marky was?
So early in the episode, like you said earlier, I think there was some good suspense and creepiness, and you weren't really sure exactly what Marky was. I thought maybe very early on that she was like the personification of nightmares, like is going to, based on the title, Nightmare as a Child. I thought maybe she goes around and tells you your darkest fears. Like, I know everything about you. And she was just going to like sort of torture her with her fears. But by the end of the episode, I did not think she was like a ghost or that child frozen. I thought she was a projection, basically the same way that Tyler is in Fight Club. Like, there's things that you need to know that are buried, or that you need to do that are buried in your brain that your sort of conscious self can't handle. So you kind of project them on a second person to tell you these things. That's kind of how I treated her, was in that same vein. She was just something that Helen's subconscious knew she needed this stuff, and this was a projection to get her through it. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yes, and I think I agree with you. That's sort of that was my idea of it, that this was a projection of a defense mechanism in her brain, but it was also protecting her from the danger that was this Peter Selden character.
Yeah, although if she was doing that, and I realize I'm arguing against myself here, but if she was doing that, you think she could have given a stronger warning in the first place. She's like, yeah, there's some danger. Somebody's coming here. I'm getting out of here, instead of like, watch out for this guy. Like, or you come with me. Like, she could have been more explicit. Yeah,
I guess it doesn't 100% make sense that her subconscious would know that he's a dangerous guy without being able to tell her why she knows he's a dangerous guy. Although, Mark, right at the beginning of this episode, you mentioned the second you saw him, you're like, this guy has to be the villain in this episode. So maybe it was the bad vibe that the subconscious was giving her about this guy, but she hadn't yet seen his face and hadn't yet figured out who he actually was. Just got a bad feeling about him. Could be.
Yeah, and I will say, I think part of why he came across as creepy was good acting in the performance, and some good, and I'll probably cycle back around to, I also think there were some very weird and bad blocking choices in this, but there was some really nice blocking of kind of how he interacts with her, kind of constantly invading her space.
Oh yeah.
There's the moment where he first comes in, it's like a very subtle thing, but super effective, when he says, like, do you mind if I come in? But he's already walking through the door as he asks it. And so I thought those little like acting and blocking choices were great. There's a great moment when he's sort of questioning her a little bit about what happened the night of her mother's death. And it just cuts to his reaction shot, and he's kind of trying to look stoic, but I thought did a good job of looking like somebody trying to look stoic, but really concerned about what she was going to say. And you see this kind of like gulp of his Adam's apple moving. So I thought I don't think he was inherently necessarily a creepy actor. Like some of you just look at like, oh, that guy's creepy. I thought he did a good job playing the character in a creepy way, but a lot of it being very subtle, standing 2 steps closer to her than he really should have without being like Snidely Whiplash, obvious villain.
Yeah. A couple of the other things that I thought were creepy, and this one I didn't notice till the second watch through, but at one point Helen asks Marky, she's like, oh, it's warm in here. Do you feel warm? And Marky says, it's quite comfortable. And that of course reminded me back of The Sixth Sense whenever they see ghosts. I know we don't think that she was a ghost, but how it gets really cold in the room when there's a ghost there. But regardless, it was a hint that for whatever reason, Marky wasn't living on the same plane as Helen, that I just wanted to call out as a clever little detail that I didn't notice till the second watch through.
I thought you were going to say it reminded you of thinking about the sweat level. Cause like, oh, well, one of them's hot. The other one's not. Let's see who's sweating.
Yeah. And then I will say that I thought the murder scene, especially for 1960, was super creepy. So we don't actually we see the shadow of Peter Selden killing Helen's mother as she's kind of hiding.
And you hear their dialogue.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
It was cool. Cause Marky's in the foreground, like in her bed, and the shadows just sort of come in without them actually making it into her room until after the mother's dead. Yeah. That reminded me a little bit of Perchance to Dream. Again, it was kind of like expressionist, really playing with these extreme shadows and sort of angles in almost like a dream way.
It reminded me of Lost, when Sawyer is thinking he had witnessed his father commit a murder-suicide against his mother, and Sawyer's hiding under the bed. And I don't think you see the shadows. I think you just see his dad's boots. Well, you hear what happens before you see anything. And then his dad's boots, he hears him kill his mom outside his room. The door opens. Sawyer's hiding under his bed. His dad's boots walk in. You see him sit down on his bed, and they do a really cool job making you feel like he's almost sat down above you. And then he shoots himself on his bed. So it just reminded me of that very creepy, very dark scene from Lost.
I thought Lost was often shot quite well, like found interesting ways to shoot those things. Yeah. Another thing I thought was creepy about the guy is it's kind of early on when he came in like on his own, but then she said, yeah, come in and sit down. And I have to say a little bit of this reminded me of something you mentioned last week about thinking about sort of male privilege that you never had or very rarely had the sort of fear of like when you're out in a park by yourself or walking alone at night. Whereas, a lot of women would have to, be more conscious of their surroundings and, what could happen to them. There was a interesting vibe of that here, that just the dynamic of him being taller than her, stronger than her, she does eventually invite him in. They sort of sit down, but just him kind of being in her space is inherently threatening.
Yeah, for sure.
And then he says, it's wonderful to see you grown up like this, still just as beautiful as you were as a little girl. I had quite the crush on you. Didn't they say she was 6? She was like 11.
Oh, 11.
She was 6?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. 11.
Well, she was
whatever
the age
way is creepy.
of Marky. Like, that's super creepy because he was an adult and had a crush on like this 11-year-old girl, and then is carrying around this picture of her. Yeah,
you're right. That was
age 11.
Super creepy.
I thought at that point that it was going to be that like he tried to rape her when she was a kid, and I was forgetting it's the Twilight Zone in 1960, and that we kind of wouldn't go there where maybe today in TV it would, and that the mom like got killed trying to protect her daughter. I thought that's what the secret was going to be, because that is such a weird thing to say. We
absolutely don't know that wasn't the intent of what the episode was, because you're 100% right. Who knows if that's actually what happened, and maybe that's the double memory that she repressed, that is what happened, because he did come into her room at the very end. That might very well be the intent of the idea behind this, that the mom was trying to defend her.
Maybe. I don't think so. Just because when she finally like recovers her buried memory, she hears them arguing about something with the finances.
Oh,
and
you're right.
And then Selden himself confirms that. He's like, there was an irregularity in the book.
She wasn't hiding it. Yeah.
Yeah. So at least I think maybe there was they wanted that as part of the suspense. And I wonder if at this time that's sort of the most they could get away with, that they would let air on network TV, is sort of this implication in that earlier line, but then it's not followed through on.
This could also be, remember, this is the whole episode is her memory playing tricks on her or blocking out. So it could also just be Selden covering his ass and being like, this is what it was all about. But you're right.
Yeah, just the fact that his explanation jives with her memory. Like if he had given the explanation and then we see the flashback, then I'd be like, maybe she's twisting her memory to match it. But anyway, it was still super creepy just that he said that. And then he pulls out the picture. And I'm like, what the hell? Particularly at this, like if I was Helen, I liked Helen. She was definitely a strong character at the end. She makes some dumb moves. And I think one of them is she is just not thinking this through. So he says that he just happened to be passing through town and saw her, doesn't ask about how did he find out where she lived. I'm like, well, it's 1960s. Maybe he looked her up in the white pages and pulled that out. Okay. Weird, but maybe plausible. If he was just randomly passing through town, happened to see her and said, oh, I should stop by and look her up, this old family friend or whatever, and happened to have that picture on him, that means he always has that picture on him. That's a red flag right there.
There were plenty of red flags.
Also, his teeth were creepy.
Oh, have you not noticed? All Twilight Zone teeth are creepy. There's so much black in between most people's teeth. And he had like a gap.
You think it's just because everyone was smoking?
I don't. I think there was not floss in the 60s. I don't know. It's gross though. I've noticed that for sure before. Can I mention just one other connection with the sort of flashback thing? And a show that we've mentioned earlier on this podcast that I'm still watching is The Blacklist, and this very much reminded me of that, where there's the main character, Liz, who's, I guess James Spader plays Red Reddington, and then Megan Boone, who plays Liz, are the two main characters. But she has some sort of traumatic memory from her past with the death of a parent that is also repressed. And they spend I think 2.5 or 3 seasons sort of slowly teasing out her getting to the point of finding out what actually happened that night. And this very much reminded me of a super condensed version of that, where there's something bad that happened, but you'd repress the details of it until some sort of specific trauma or something comes to draw those out. Yeah, that was it. I've not watched The Blacklist, but I am marrying a Reddington, so I guess I'm sort of intimately connected with that show.
I don't know if I'd recommend it or not. Like I said, I just really love James Spader, so it's hard not to watch him.
A lot of people have recommended it to me, but I've got too much else to watch. So
it's not like I don't think it's a bad show. It's not like I would tell somebody don't watch that, but it's just, even as somebody who is watching it at this point, kind of for completion, I want to see how it all wraps up. There's so much good TV and stuff out there right now that it's hard for me to recommend that, because there are other things I would recommend much more highly that I think are actually better.
Sure. I don't have a whole lot of specifics about this episode, but I do have sort of a tonal thematic thing that I want to talk about. So if you want to have if you have specific stuff that you wanted to address, might be a good time now.
Hint, hint. And to try to do it quickly, right?
Yeah. Bearing in mind, we are at 42 minutes.
Okay. I don't have a ton. I mentioned already there were some weird cuts, and I think just that was something that at multiple points kind of took me out of the episode a little bit and broke the sort of suspense vibe that I thought it generally created pretty well. And let's grant that almost the whole episode takes place in her apartment without the characters doing a lot. It's really them sitting around and talking. Reminding me a little bit of Long Live Walter Jameson, where there's that sort of long stretch in the middle that's just him and his boss talking, and it's super intense without much actual action. But that also did have kind of earlier scenes that set up different locations, and then him going back and forth to his house, and then him seeing his ex-wife. So there's other things. This kind of whole thing was tied in there. So it's a challenge, but I think they still could have found better ways to do it. There's one bad follow focus. It's after there's the crash zoom on her looking at the photo that Selden had showing herself as Marky, essentially as the kid. And then it cuts to her on the couch, And there's this weird thing where the camera's pushing in on her and it starts to go like dramatically out of focus that I thought it was going to like go inside her head into dream sequence and then comes back into focus. Like it's literally just a technical mistake. And I just noted it because it's an example of the kind of thing that I always tell my students that you just don't see in Hollywood productions. Like they don't not have the camera in focus by accident. And so it was weird to see that actually make it through to the episode because it's clearly a mistake because it's in focus, loses focus for a while and comes back in. And then I guess the last sort of specific thing I wanted to note is that moment I mentioned before where they're at the door and Selden says, that was your nickname when you were a little girl. They called you Marky. Goes to one of the worst cuts to commercial we have seen in a Twilight Zone. Helen walks away from the door and just kind of like stares off into space after this revelation that, like I said, basically confirmed what we already knew. And then this very slow fade out. And then we just fade back in on the same angle with Helen in the foreground, Selden in the background. I was like, that was not like a cliffhanger. That was almost like okay, so the kid was her. Got it. It wouldn't have been satisfactory as the end of the episode, but it felt more like an ending than like a cliffhanger or twister. I can't wait to see what happens next.
There were a couple of spots where it would have made, I don't know what the timing was, but that I can just think that would have made for a better cliffhanger, like when he first reveals the picture or when they both.
Yes, that would have been perfect.
Or when she grabs Marky's arm and shows that she has the same scar that Helen has. Yeah. Those were both would have been better cliffhangers, but yeah.
Yeah. And when it does fade out, she's hearing Marky singing "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star."
That was creepy. Kids singing is creepy.
Which was cool and creepy, and then tied into the scene at the end because apparently in this reality, kids just hang out by themselves on the stairs,
and there's only one song.
There's only one song. Well, I was just going to point out it was not until just a few years ago, like as an adult with kids and them singing some stuff, that I realized "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star" is the same tune as Baba Black Sheep and the alphabet song. Else. I had never made that connection. Yeah, if you want to get into your larger tonal stuff.
And I don't know, we probably won't have that much to say about this, hopefully. But one thing I did notice about this is the tone. I know this is an anthology series, but the tone from one episode to the next in Twilight Zone, the shifts are wild between episodes sometimes, because juxtaposing, I think, Mr. Denton and One for the Angels, going back right to the early on episodes, just looking at the two of those episodes, I think which were back to back, those are wildly disparate episodes. And I know there's a week's time between these episodes, and obviously this is an anthology and it's not telling the same story, but tonally, just thinking about A Nice Place to Visit, which is what we talked about last week, versus this one, what a crazy shift in tone. Because A Nice Place to Visit was, yes, it had that twist reveal that he was in hell, but it was kind of like a lighthearted, jokey kind of episode. Or like The Fever, like going from The Hitchhiker to The Fever.
Let's not talk about The Fever, please.
Well, think about how like goofy The Fever is after The Hitchhiker, which was a very menacing, creepy episode. Or like going from And When the Sky Was Open, which I still think is the most horrifying episode, to What You Need, which is kind of a more like One for the Angels, more of this, not as good, but like more of this sort of lighthearted kind of look at it. I just thought it was interesting, the tonal shifts from week to week on Twilight Zone.
Well, thinking about the tonal shifts, and just to focus, those are some great examples you mentioned, just to focus on the one you said sort of the most recent with A Nice Place to Visit compared with this, you hit kind of the overall feel of those episodes, because A Nice Place to Visit is largely pretty like just watching the guy get what he wants and have a good time. And this one was super suspenseful. But then the ends of those have a big sort of twist, but also completely contradict each other. Contradict is weird because they're like separate episodes, but are like so vastly different. I'm agreeing with you. And I noted this is one of the most optimistic endings we've seen of a Twilight Zone episode. We'll get to the end voiceover, but it really ends on like a positive note. Like she vanquished her demons, got justice for her mother, and you feel like things end much better than they were at the beginning, which is unusual for a Twilight Zone episode. Even the ones that, like One for the Angels, which has a sort of positive ending, he gets to do his, amazing pitch, and he sort of accepts his death. And it's not a negative ending, like, but it's not a sort of upbeat, like he died, he's going off to his afterlife, is very different than like, I got justice for the person who murdered my mother and can go on living a happier life now. And comparing that with the end of A Nice Place to Visit, which was super cheesy, but like the end is literally finds out he's in hell and just a demon like laughing maniacally at him. It's like exact opposite.
One thing that this just sparked in me that I want to bring up, because I know we like to make modern references, modern recommendations.
We've literally never referenced any modern things in this entire.
I could imagine this episode's ending with Helen in a sort of weird metaphorical way, like tucking Marky into bed and like putting her to sleep. Did you see the Babadook?
Ooh. No.
Okay, the Babadook, I think it's Australian, is an Australian horror film. It is, I am not good with horror. It is super creepy. But you know what? I don't want to ruin the end of the Babadook. But a lot of this reminded me of the Babadook, where it's a more metaphorical. Watch the Babadook and then write us an email and tell me that I'm right about this, because the Babadook was this metaphorical, menacing thing that they had to deal with. Kind of like, not that Marky was the threat, but she was this manifestation of their minds. Watch the Babadook. It's good. I think it's on Netflix. Or at least it was when I watched it a while back. So, but it's good. And it's too modern for me to spoil it, and not enough people have seen it, so I don't want to spoil it. But go watch the Babadook and then tell me how right I am. Mark, should we listen to the closing narration?
I want to bring up one more thing from the end.
Sure.
Before we roll on with this, and while you're on the modern references, the question that I had, so Selden gives his explanation, which is way too long and too detailed, explaining what we already know to her, but he's talking to Helen about what had happened and why he did it, and then that she was screaming, so he had to leave before he could kill her as the remaining witness or whatever. And then he explains he's been keeping tabs on her and realized he didn't have to kill her because she had this mind blank and didn't know what happened, but he thought maybe their memory would come back at some point. So he's been keeping tabs, says, I knew when you were in Chicago and then in college and then here. But she never had remembered. What sparks her remembering, and I think what's implied is what sparks Marky appearing, is seeing him outside the school. And so what struck me as just this sort of interesting philosophical question was, what if he had never come back and been seen by her, just sort of kept tabs at a distance? Then she never would have remembered. He sort of brings about his own doom. And that's a very common device in movies and stories involving time travel and involving prophecy, right? Where if you didn't know the prophecy, you wouldn't fulfill it,
Right.
Going all the way back to the ancient Greeks and trying to leave to avoid fulfilling a prophecy, and you end up fulfilling it. And the more modern references, two things that we have referenced before on this show: Minority Report, where the guy is going to commit a murder because he finds out he's expected to go commit a murder.
Yep.
And the part in The Matrix, your other favorite movie.
I love Minority Report, by the way. I love Minority Report. Don't like The Matrix. Just to be clear.
Where he said he's meeting with the Oracle, and she says, "Oh, don't worry about the vase." And he like turns around to look and knocks over a vase. And she's like, what's really going to bake your noodle later on is, would you still have broken it if I hadn't said anything? And that's what struck me about this, is like, why did Selden decide to show himself now? Because if he hadn't, he would have got away with it. I don't know. I just thought it was it wasn't the focus of this episode, but it was a very Twilight Zone-y sort of thing that he brings about himself getting caught and killed by not being able to leave it alone.
I was thinking the same thing. And to that point, when he was saying he was keeping tabs on her, was he checking in? Because she presumably would have recognized him right off the bat if he had been checking in. How was he making sure that she wasn't remembering stuff if he wasn't checking in? I agree, that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Was he just kind of lurking in the bushes, hoping to overhear conversations that maybe she was like, hey, I think I remember who my mom's murderer is. So that there wasn't a whole lot of sense to what Sheldon was doing, or Peter Selden was doing. So I do agree with you on that.
The first time he introduces himself, I really thought he said Peter Sellers. I'm like, that is a bizarre coincidence. And I had to rewind to oh, Peter Selden. But I literally like stopped him like, was Peter Sellers already known at this point? Maybe it was a coincidence. And so I looked in the first, so he was already an actor, but not necessarily a big name. The first Pink Panther movie was 1963. Dr. Strangelove was 1964. I don't know. I really thought he said Peter Sellers and went off on this whole Peter Sellers thing. And then I like, let me make sure he said that. I went back. I'm like, no, he said Selden. What the hell was I hearing?
Maybe Peter Sellers had rejected them for a role, and Serling's like, all right, I'll make you this creepy murderer.
And Peter Sellers is like, no, I'm going to go be a famous movie star instead. All right. You want to read your
closing narration?
Any voiceover? Yeah.
Miss Helen Foley, who has lived in night and who will wake up to morning. Miss Helen Foley, who took a dark spot from the tapestry of her life and rubbed it clean, then stepped back a few paces and got a good look at the Twilight Zone. Love it. I love the imagery of wiping the dark spot from the tapestry of her life. That reminds me of, again, I was raised Catholic and was taught about original sin and about trying to erase original sin, which you can never completely erase, but is always on your soul, but you can make it less. Thanks, Catholic Church.
Well, and also reminded me of Macbeth with the out damn spot. I agreed. I love the tapestry imagery. I thought the very last line was one of the cheesiest ways to tie in the actually saying the Twilight Zone that we've seen. And this was a voiceover that maybe I thought would have been better without it.
Did you see? I think that was kind of neat because the tapestry, her whole life had been clouded by this sort of Twilight Zone-y episode. So she rubs this thing out and steps back and looks, and it's like, oh, I see how weird this whole life has been because of the Twilight Zone. I don't know. I didn't think it was as shoehorned as a couple of them have been in the past, but
and that's fair. Some of them have been more shoehorned. I felt like this fit. I thought it was cheesy, and just knowing that there have been a couple that didn't use it, that
you could have gotten away without using it.
I thought this one would have been one I would have got away with not using it.
Should we rank our sweat?
I don't really remember anyone being sweaty.
I don't remember at all. I called it a 1.
1? Sure.
Okay. And then should we rate this episode? Do you want to start us or do you want me to start us?
I can start. So I really like the vibe this one created with just sort of like the people in a room and the tension and suspense. And I thought this did a better job than some of the other ones we've seen recently. And we've been on, I don't want to say like a terrible streak, but we've seen several lately that we were not big fans of. I thought this did a better job of feeling like a Twilight Zone and keeping some sort of interest, even with the twists and surprises. The thing that I didn't love about it was I thought the structure of it kind of left something to be desired, in particular 2 things. One is I thought Helen, as many of our protagonists in the Twilight Zone have been, was just super accepting of things. Like the very first thing that Marky says to her when she sees her out on the stairs are, I know all about you. Yeah. And instead of like running away, she's like, why don't you come in and have some cocoa? And then Marky keeps telling her stuff about her, and she doesn't question it or ask Marky, like, how do you know this or anything? She just sort of accepts it all. And maybe that's because subconsciously she knows Marky's part of her. I don't know. But in terms of as a TV episode, like setting up that's supposed to be a twist or surprise, or we're not supposed to know what's going on with Marky, it was very weird. And I'm like, come on, Helen, get your shit together. You need to have a little surprise or show some things here. Then the other thing was the burn on her arm. This is one of those things, if a student turned in a script like this, I would say you've got to find a way to make that burn tied to that night. Like you can't have these 2 hidden memories from your childhood that are just completely unrelated. And that turns out the only reason for the burn is so that at the end she can grab Marky's arm and see that she has the same burn. Like just narrative economy. It was so bizarre to me that those 2 things were not connected, and the burn just ended up being, at some point she got a random burn.
That's a great point. And it would have been super easy to connect it because the argument could have been about he was watching her daughter and he let her get too close to the stove and she burned herself. I guess that maybe wouldn't lead to him murdering her mother, but it definitely could have easily tied in.
But there was a fight, like knocked over a candle and like part of the house burned and she got caught. Like there's lots of ways it could have been done. Sure. And the fact that it didn't, to me, was like really low hanging fruit that they
that's a good point.
Missed. So I liked the episode. I'm going to say like a 3.5.
Okay, so I'm at a 4 just off
Okay.
the cuff. So you want to hear some 3.5s?
I might be able to be talked up to a 4. Let me hear some 3.5s and some 4s.
Some 3.5s. Mr. Denton on Doomsday, Walking Distance, The Lonely. That might be it for 3.5s. And then 4s, 16 millimeter Shrine, Time Enough at Last. Ooh. The Purple Testament. Okay, maybe I can be talked down to a 3.5 because
I would say the other 3.5s. I think the other ones you listed, other than The Lonely, I actually liked a little better than this one, but are in the same ballpark.
Yeah. Okay, I can definitely be talked down to a 3.5 because I love the Purple Testament.
Although we should give this one an extra half star just for those ties that the lieutenant and psychologist are wearing at the end, which were ridiculous. Like I really thought those two guys, like, I think they forgot to cast those characters, and there was a mob movie shooting like on the next lot, and they just went and grabbed a couple of the mobster actors and like, here, read this dialogue quick, and then we'll get out of here.
Well,
because they looked like mobsters, they were dressed like mobsters, and they did not talk like they were a psychologist and a police lieutenant.
Maybe they had the same taste in ties as Rocky from A Nice Place to Visit, because he picks out, because Fats or Mr. Pip tries to pick out a tie for him. He's like, that ain't a tie. And then he goes and picks out like, it's just short of like a piano key tie. And like, he's like, no, this is a tie. And it's a horrible tie.
I don't know how we didn't talk about that last time, but that outfit he put together when he had the choice of like any fashion in the world is like, that would be like a punishment to make somebody wear that outfit, and it's what he chose.
If you knew that you didn't have to flirt with girls, you could get whatever you wanted, you wouldn't get kicked out of any restaurant. I don't know. Maybe it's comfortable. But anyhow, are you ready to guess next week?
Maybe if I knew that nobody cared what I would wear, I would like throw on sweatpants and a t-shirt.
True.
Like, yeah.
That's one of the things about like Mad Men and shows. I can't stand when someone comes home from work still in their tie, still in their shoes, sometimes still in their sport coat, and like lays on the couch and has a drink. I'm like, I'm immediately, if I haven't taken off my suit by the time I've left work, I'm taking it off the second I get home. And I also hate when characters sit in office chairs with their sport coat still on. Take your fucking coat off. That is not comfortable. I promise that's not comfortable.
Do you watch The Goldbergs, or have you ever seen it?
Is that from Larry David's buddy? What's his name? The guy from Chicago that always talks with all the vocal fry like that. What's his name? Jeff.
I don't think so.
Jeff something. Isn't it? I'm pretty sure it's
Jeff. I have no idea what you're talking
Garland.
about.
Jeff Garland. Isn't that Jeff Garland?
Oh yeah, he is in that.
Yes. Yeah, I cannot stand him. So I probably will not be able to stomach it.
I don't know if you would like the show or not. I will say it is pitched like straight down the middle at our generation. Like it's super, every episode starts with, it was October 2nd, 1980 something. And it's all full of like nostalgic stuff from our childhoods. But his character, the dad in the family, one of his sort of like defining traits is like the moment he gets home from work, like he's still at the front door and just like takes off his pants because he doesn't want to wear his pants, and then sits down in his easy chair in his underwear.
I'm
it's
not
kind of
that
like
guy.
a running joke, but I mean, like, it's actually more realistic than the
for sure
came home and laid down in my full suit and tie and dress shoes.
That's annoying to me. Anyhow, are you ready to guess next week's episode, Mark?
Yeah, let's see what it is.
You might recognize this one. Next week's episode 30, A Stop at Willoughby.
A Stop at Willoughby. I don't recognize the title, at least. I don't know if I'll end up recognizing the episode. By the way, my guess from last week was completely off and had nothing to do with anything related to this. It would have been a better guess to actually guess it was going to be about Nightmare, the Marvel villain, who apparently is going to be the main villain in the second Doctor Strange movie, I heard.
And we kind of didn't have a monkey's paw, unless you count the monkey's paw as Peter Selnick or Selleck, whatever.
Go
as
ahead,
him,
say Peter Sellers.
Peter Sellers, as him causing his own downfall. There was not really a monkey's paw.
No.
Anyhow,
come on,
okay.
Twilight Zone, get your act together.
Stop at Willoughby.
Stop at Willoughby. I'm going to say somebody's on a bus or train and it breaks down unexpectedly and they have to get off at this town called Willoughby while they try to fix the bus or train, and something weird happens. And a monkey's paw.
If I recall this episode, I think that's going to bear out to be a pretty solid guess.
All right.
Thank you all for listening. This was Deja Reviewed. Next week's episode is episode 30 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone, titled A Stop at Willoughby. It's available on US Netflix if you want to watch along with us. Feel free to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe. Or you can find us at dejareviewed.com, where you can find all our social media, and you can leave us a voicemail or a text message. And we hope you tune in next week.
Deja Reviewed.